We're going to look at verse 5 of chapter 8. It says this: those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires. But those who live in accordance to the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. So here it's talking about a mindset. What do we place our mind on? We could either place our mind, if we live according to the flesh, we're going to place our mind on the things, the desires of the flesh. But if we're walking in accordance to the Spirit, our minds will be set on things that the Spirit desires. When we look at this idea of our minds being set on fleshly desires, many of us, our thoughts go to, our ideas go to this idea of letting our minds just go down the tubes. Just totally, our minds become depraved and rotten and corrupt. That's a part of it. That's a part of it. We're called out of that. We're freed from that. But I actually think that we could set our minds on our fleshly desires by focusing so hard on avoiding our fleshly desires. I think that's a part of what Paul's getting at here when he's kind of wrestling with this whole metric system of do's and don'ts and living according to that or according to the Spirit. You see, we could set our mind on the desires of the flesh by focusing on avoiding the desires of the flesh. If we get so focused on avoiding the desires of the flesh, our mind is set on them. I was raised in the church, and I was raised in Christianity, brought up in it. And I was raised in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it seemed like every sermon at youth group, I went to a Christian school, so then every sermon in chapel was, don't go to parties, don't drink, don't smoke, don't sleep around. Don't go to parties, don't drink, don't smoke, don't sleep around. Don't go to parties, don't drink, don't smoke, don't sleep around. And then sometimes when prom would come, they'd invite us to all sign a document that we wouldn't do those things. And we get so focused on don't do that thing, don't do that thing, don't do that thing. Here's the deal, is our minds are being so focused on the sinful fleshly desires that we're trying to avoid. Now, avoiding those things is good. As a parent, I don't want those things for my kids. I don't want them to walk in their fleshly desires. But I know that if I lead them in the ways of Jesus and I lead them in the ways of the Spirit, that we will not be focusing on our fleshly desires. And that's a call for all of us as we disciple one another, as we parent kids. It's a call to set our mind on the things of the Spirit. I have a friend who's a motorcycle driver. I'm not interested in motorcycles at all, but he is one who is a car collector, loves motorcycles. And we were talking one day actually about this idea of do's and don'ts and sinful desires versus life of the Spirit. And here's what he said. He said, you know, Dave, I was trained in motorcycle school that if all of a sudden something happens on the road in front of me, like an accident or something's out on the road, like maybe there's just a backpack laying there or something. If I want to avoid that and avoid a crash, he said that if he focused on avoiding that thing or that accident or whatever it is, if you focus on avoiding that thing, he said, you'll most likely crash because you're so focused on it. He said, what you need to do is you need to look past that thing and set your gaze on something else to drive towards the direction of what you're setting your gaze towards. I think this is key for us in our Christian life, that we set our gaze towards the things of the Spirit. And it's possible to set our gaze on the desires of the flesh, not just in allowing our minds to be depraved and to fall into sin, but to be so focused on avoiding those things. Verse 6, the mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it even do so. Those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God. If you're part of our Galatians study in a couple weeks, we're going to get to Galatians 5. I want to read to you Galatians 5, starting verse 16. It says this, "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." So instead of focusing on the desires of the flesh, walk by the Spirit. It says this, "For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you do not do whatever you want. But I tell you, if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law." So we think that following the law and the list of do's and don'ts will actually free us, give us the power to do it, but we're called to walk by the Spirit, and we're not even a part of that system. And when we walk by the Spirit, we do not fall into gratifying the desires of the flesh.